All right, Senator, whenever you're ready.
Hey, all. Thanks for joining. I'm going to talk about a couple of topics at the start and then glad to answer questions. First, the ongoing debate on the floor of the Senate right now about the Republican SAVE Act proposal, which would be an onerous national voter ID law that most estimate would make about 1/10 of those who are currently registered eligible voters. It would dramatically increase burdens and obstacles to them actually voting. This is not a bill that's fundamentally about preventing those who are not eligible to vote from voting. It's more of a bill about putting obstacles in the way of certain groups of people who are eligible to vote to keep them from voting. It would have a particularly negative effect on seniors, on low-income people, on women voters. It would have probably an unintended negative effect on veterans and, or, I'm sorry, active duty military who serve abroad. And that's why a number of veterans organizations and groups like the League of Women Voters have come out against it. And it's a bill that is a bill in search of a problem because we do not have the kind of voter fraud in this country that the Republicans are trying to invent to justify passing this effort to disenfranchise actually registered voters. As you know, elections are run by states. Virginia has a voter ID law. I got asked by a reporter in the hall the other day, why I didn't support voter ID laws. And I said, I do. Virginia has one. And the reporter seemed shocked to know that, oh, wow, states actually have voter ID laws. Virginia has a voter ID law. Virginia has a system that has a lot of checks to make sure that the system of voting is one with integrity that Virginians can count on. I'm proud that that system is held up, whether Democrats or Republicans have the governor's mansion and have the leadership of the state's board of elections. And so the notion that we need to tie up the Senate for weeks, possibly, to advance an agenda of Donald Trump's, him claiming that he's going to refuse to sign any other legislation unless or until the Senate, Congress passes this SAVE Act, is highly unusual given the fact that Virginia already has a fine law. So together with Senator Warner, I'm in strong opposition to this. I'm likely to be on the floor at an unusual hour because the Republicans want to do this around the clock as if they can wear us out, but they're not going to wear us out. I'm likely to be on the floor from 4 to 6 tomorrow morning, both protecting against procedural shenanigans, but I'll use that time on the floor to walk through the history of voting in Virginia, of voting suppression in Virginia, the current Virginia laws with respect to voting, including the current Virginia voter ID law, and how the SAVE Act would actually make it harder for eligible registered Virginians to vote. Second thing that's going on right now, we're in a discussion about DHS funding. I want to make sure that everybody is fully aware of the status of this discussion. The DHS funding covers a number of federal agencies. The controversial agency is ICE because of the gross abuses that poorly trained ICE agents are perpetrating in cities all across the country. And Democrats, together with American citizens, are demanding that before more dollars go to ICE, there be reforms. And so what we've said to Republicans is, hey, guys, we've negotiated with you, and you're the majority, so you didn't have to vote yes, but you have. We've negotiated full year funding deals for all of the other agencies within DHS, the TSA, FEMA, the Coast Guard, the CISA, the Cybersecurity Agency. These negotiations are done. You, as the Republican majority in both houses, have agreed to the funding levels, and we are perfectly willing to give full year funding to all of those agencies while we continue to have a debate about ICE reforms. Thus far, the Republicans have refused to allow that. They've refused to allow us to actually fund the agencies at the level they themselves support. So if you're going through airlines right now and you wonder why TSA lines are long, call a Republican legislator and say, fund TSA. If you're worried about emergency response because of wildfires or hurricane season coming up in the summer, call a Republican legislator and say, fund FEMA. If you want the Coast Guard to be able to do interdictions of drugs coming to the country or provide rescue for U.S. craft that get in trouble in the oceans around the United States. Call your Republican member of Congress and say, fund the Coast Guard. The American public wants us to find reforms for ICE, and we're going to do that. And that's actually not intruding upon ICE operations, because the Republicans passed a bill last year giving them a whole bunch of extra money that they can use, even as we have this discussion. But while ICE has the funding to operate right now, while we have the discussion about reform, the other agencies don't. And the Republicans are holding up that funding. We've tried repeatedly to fund the agencies only to have Republicans block them. Status of the war in Iran. We're going into the third week in what is, in my view, is an illegal war, because the president bypassed the Constitution and Congress to start it. An unjustified war because there was no imminent threat that Iran posed to the United States, and then has now been validated by administration officials who come and testify to us in classified settings. We have been advocating for the need to stop an illegal and unwise war that's spiking everybody's energy costs, that's leading to chaos throughout the region, that's leading to U.S. troops being killed unnecessarily and others wounded and thousands deployed far away from their families. And we're going to continue to advocate that this unnecessary and illegal war be drawn to a close. But in the meantime, we are asking, at least let us have hearings before the public. Don't only give us information in classified that we're not allowed to disclose even to our constituents, even when they have their own kids or their own spouses deployed in this Donald Trump's war in the Middle East. I got a real good answer this morning at a Foreign Relations Committee classified hearing when other colleagues and I suggested we need to have open hearings. The chairman of the committee, who I always acknowledge when I disagree with him, he nevertheless is straightforward, says he is not having public hearings because he does not want to expose the Trump administration officials to being publicly questioned about their decisions. He does not want to expose Trump administration officials to being publicly questioned by senators about the decisions they're making, about the rationale for the war, about the plans for the war, about the chaos in the region, about the likelihood of these energy cost spikes extending. Virginians are paying about 60 cents more per gallon of gas than before the war started, because Virginians buy nearly 6 million gallons of gas every day. That's real money. That's real. I'm sorry, we buy 8 million gallons of gas a day. 8 million times 60 cents. It's nearly $5 million extra that Virginians are paying a day to buy gas because of this war. But they don't want to allow public questioning of their decision making. That's outrageous. So we're going to continue to do all we can to put pressure on them. Finally, I've introduced this week 2 important pieces of legislation. One, a maternal vaccination bill that I hope could get added to a larger healthcare package that will pass through the Health Committee this year to expand the ability of pregnant moms to get vaccinations, to expand the appropriate safe testing of vaccines on the mothers of newborns to make sure that they're safe, so that moms can have confidence about getting the vaccines that they need for both their own health and the health of their children. That's a bill that I introduced. I'm really proud of it. And then second, with Tom Cotton, who's a Republican colleague from Arkansas and a co-member of the Armed Services Committee, we introduced a bill called the RX Access Bill, which tries to fix a problem with the TRICARE insurance for military families. Beneficiaries of TRICARE do not get the same treatment with respect to non-generic pharmaceutical drugs that others do. They're able to access generic drugs in community pharmacies, your neighborhood pharmacy, but if they get prescribed a non-generic drug, and sometimes that's needed for a medical condition, they can only access it by mail or through a pharmacy on a military facility. They can't use the pharmacist at the local community pharmacy like everybody else does. Senator Cotton and I have a bill that would fix that, that would allow military members who are given a prescription for a non-generic drug to use community pharmacies to access that prescription just like anybody else can. We've introduced it with the belief that we can get it included in the National Defense Authorizing Act that we are working on now and will likely pass through committee later in June. Good bipartisan bill. Why should our military families who have TRICARE be treated worse than people who have commercial insurance and have more obstacles in their way to access the pharmaceuticals they need? With that, glad to open it up and take your questions.
First questions from Randy from Telemundo.
Hey, Randy.
Hello, buenas tardes, ¿cómo está?
Buenas tardes. Bien, hombre. Gracias.
Gracias. Una pregunta sobre Mark Wayne Mullen. ¿Usted lo conoce? ¿Usted ha trabajado con él en el Senado? Él es el nombre que quiere Donald Trump para tomar el puesto de Kristi Noem. ¿Usted cree que él va a ser un buen líder o usted cree que va a ser una continuación de lo que ya está haciendo Kristi Noem?
Yo creo que va a ser una continuación, no de Kristi Noem, pero una continuación de la política de Stephen Miller. Él es el jefe de los esfuerzos contra migrantes ahorita. Y es posible cambiar el título del secretario de Homeland Security, pero el hombre que está haciendo decisiones es Stephen Miller y él no va a cambiar. Entonces yo creo que vamos a tener la misma problema en el futuro con cualquier secretario porque las decisiones son decisiones de Stephen Miller.
Next, we have Mike from WHSV.
Mike.
Hi, Senator Kaine. Thank you for taking time.
Yeah.
My question for you is the shock resignation from Joe Kent, specifically some of the messaging that he left behind about the war in Iran. I wanted to get your reaction to that, and how is that going to fuel your discussions about the war with your colleagues?
I don't know Mr. Kent. He's been a controversial figure, but that letter was a very powerful one. Here he is, a multiple deployed combat veteran with a wife who was killed in the Middle East as serving her country there. And so he knows the situation in the Middle East. President Trump said he was soft on security. I don't think you can look at the guy's record and think that that's true. Instead, I think he's expressing a frustration that many feel, that this is a war, as he said in his letter, there is no imminent threat of Iran attacking the United States. And that's what we've heard from administration officials. They try to create a bootstrap argument around imminence by saying, well, if Israel attacked Iran, then Iran would retaliate against us. But that's not imminence. When there was no imminent threat of Iran attacking the U.S. absent what Israel done, that's not imminent threat to the United States. And that has been the repeated testimony of administration witnesses to us, that the quote imminence was, well, if Israel attacks, they'll attack us. There's no evidence that we told Israel, hey, don't attack right now because you'll put U.S. troops at risk. Instead, it seemed like the U.S. was of the opinion that Israel was going to attack. Look, Israel gets to make decision for Israelis, and I don't make decisions for Israelis, but Israel should not force the hand of the United States. I do know that the current prime minister of Israel has long wanted multiple U.S. presidents to join together in a war against Iran. Earlier presidents have been wise enough to resist that pressure. Donald Trump, sadly, was not, and that is a source of frustration for many of us.
Next, we have Mark from CBS 19.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Senator, thanks so much for making the time. Just want to get your thoughts on recent bills passed by the Virginia General Assembly, really limiting cooperation between state and local law enforcement with ICE. Those are now headed to Governor Abigail Spanberger's desk. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
I will say, and is it Matthew or who is it that asked that question?
Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. Mark, I haven't looked at the details. I think she's got about 970 bills on her desk, and I got my hands full here in the Senate without being able to master the details of all the General Assembly bills. Look, there are areas, ICE has authority to operate around Virginia. I think they should operate in cooperation with, rather than over the objections of, local officials. I think they should coordinate with local officials so that there's not confusion about what they're doing. I think ICE agents shouldn't wear masks. I think they should identify themselves by wearing uniforms with name tags. I think they should use body cameras. I think ICE agents should follow the same standards that our local law enforcement agencies follow. Why would we tolerate federal law enforcement adhering to lesser standards than local agencies? But in terms of the particulars of any bills that are going to the governor's desk, I really haven't followed them.
Next, we have Daniel from WRIC.
Hey, Daniel.
Hi, Danelle with
Oh,
WRIC.
Danelle. Okay.
Good afternoon. Question regarding the war in Iran. So just a few days ago, some lawmakers introduced the Gas Prices Relief Act looking to suspend the 18-cent federal gas tax. Is this something that you would support? Why or why not?
Well, if you do that, what you immediately then do is you dramatically cut funding for roads and public transit. And so you can't, because that's a dedicated tax that goes into funding the roads and public transit that people rely on every day. I'm not aware of that proposal before you just bring it up, but you cannot suspend that collection without also cutting services that people depend upon every day. And so I would want the committee in the Senate that has jurisdiction over these transportation taxes to have a hearing and look at the pluses and minuses, because I think all the public would want to know what the pluses and minuses are.
Next, we have Michaela from WDBJ.
Hey, Michaela.
Hi, Senator Kane. Yeah, this is Michaela with WDBJ7.
Yep.
Do you think Virginia airports are at risk of closing or having fewer flights due to the partial government shutdown and TSA workers going on strike or possibly being transferred out to bigger airports?
It could happen, but it's needless. Republicans just need to pass a funding bill for TSA. I mean, we've already negotiated the bill. The Republican majorities in both houses have accepted that the budgeted level is appropriate. And so we're asking them, just fund TSA. Let's have a continuing discussion about reforms to ICE, but there's no reason not to fund TSA. Thus far, Republicans have been unwilling to do this. They have been unwilling to separate out the TSA funding, which is not controversial and is agreed upon, from the controversial area of ICE funding. So there's no reason for, reductions in force. There's no reason for strikes. There's no reason for reduced service. Just vote to fund ICE at the level that you've already found acceptable. Vote to fund TSA and the other DHS agencies at a level you've already found acceptable.
Next, we have Gene from WFIR.
Hey, Gene.
Hey, Senator. I wanted to ask you, go back to the war. Is there any thought that perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu kind of sweet-talked the president into coming aboard with this war? Because Israel really seems to be widening the scope of the war into other countries. They went after some natural gas fields in Iran today, which really could impact us down the road. Is there any feeling that maybe we sort of got duped?
You know, Gene, that's an interesting question. I don't think we got duped, because I think the prime minister has been really clear, not deceptive at all, in what he wants. He wanted to go to war against Iran, and he wanted the U.S. to join him. I don't think there was deception. I don't think it was duping. It was like, this is what we want to do, and we want you to join us. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has urged multiple presidents of both parties to do this. But American presidents have heard this encouragement and said, wait a minute, what's right for you may not be right for us. And Democratic and Republican presidents before President Trump, and even President Trump in his first term, refused to do it. You know, you're a sovereign nation. You will do what you think is in the best interest of Israelis, but we're different. And we have to make our decisions for ourselves. Earlier presidents had the wisdom and the backbone to turn down this request for some reason, and I don't exactly know why. I have a suspicion that it was President Trump wanting to shift the attention away from the cratering economy, shift the attention away from, prices going too high and other problems. But for some reason, President Trump in his second term didn't do what previous presidents, including President Trump in term one, did, which was say, thanks, but no thanks.
Next, we have Regina from Wavy.
Hey, Regina.
Good afternoon, Senator. How are you today?
Good.
You have heard about the plumbing problems on board USS Gerald R. Ford. Now there's been a fire. USNI is reporting that the Ford is leaving the Red Sea to go to Crete for repairs. What are your concerns?
This is an example, one of many examples for why this war in Iran is so foolish and unnecessary. You take the Ford. It was scheduled for a 7-month deployment. The president had the Ford deployed in the Middle East and then decided, I want to send the Ford carrier group to near Venezuela for actions there. Now I want to send it back to the Middle East for actions near Iran. The Ford has gone well past its 7-month deployment. I think we may be in the 9th month now, and it's scheduled to go longer. That means all the sailors who were expecting to be home and to see their families around Christmas time have not been able to do that. And it means that common maintenance issues that stack up on a boat when it's being heavily used, but that if it sticks to its deployed period, you bring it back in and you do the repairs, those maintenance and other issues which affect people's quality of life, they grow and they become more severe the more you run the ship past its scheduled deployment. And so, yes, you have all these reported problems about clogged toilets and problems with the plumbing system, bad for quality of life, bad for morale. And then you had this fire, 30 hours, 600 sailors had to be displaced from their bunks to fight this fire. This is what happens when you use an asset like the Ford in a way that was not the intended use. And then what happens when you get the Ford into Crete and eventually back to the United States to finish the deployment? The repairs that you would normally do following a 7-month deployment will be much more significant, will take much longer. The Ford will be out of commission longer before its next deployment than was the original plan. Perhaps when it gets into the shipyard in the United States, because it was delayed getting in, there might be another ship that's in the shipyard then for repairs. So when you make a foolish decision and then you do this deployment, you end up dramatically affecting not only the Ford, not only the sailors on the Ford, but it has a rippling effect on the use of other assets. And that's why one of the many reasons why this unnecessary and illegal war in Iran is such a mistake. The president seems to feel like the military is just like little game pieces that he can move around the board, but these are human lives. These are our best, our troops, our sailors, our best and brightest. And you don't just treat them like a palace guard and order them here, there, or everywhere. The president not bringing the war to Congress meant that we didn't have the chance to really test, is this in the national interest? The lack of a plan in advance that leads to things like the bombing of a school or U.S. aircraft getting shot down by an ally, Kuwait, or unnecessary deaths of U.S. troops and the injuries of others. Because if we didn't give a real good heads up to our allies that we were about to start a war that might lead to retaliation against them, they didn't have a chance to put their defenses fully into place because of the absence of consultation. The president is now seeing energy prices go up dramatically because of actions that choke off transit of petroleum through the Straits of Hormuz. He was warned about this. He apparently believed that the warnings that Iran would do this were wrong, ignored a lot of advice, and now look, people are paying higher costs. And because the U.S. decided to bomb Iranian petroleum infrastructure and Israel decided to bomb it, those costs are likely to go on for a while. And now the president is asking for allies to come help us in the Straits of Hormuz when he wouldn't even do them the dignity of giving them a heads up in advance. You can't kick allies around, ignore them, not consult them, call them the 51st state, threaten to invade them, impose tariffs on them, and then suddenly say, but oh, by the way, we need you. That's not the way this works. Allies respond well if you treat them like an ally. If you treat them like an adversary, they don't respond well. So this has been an operation that's been, in my view, badly botched from the beginning. Our troops always serve so honorably and bravely, but they're often subject to the consequences of poor civilian decision-making. And the The challenges of the Ford are just kind of in microcosm what happens when civilians make bad decisions.
Thank you.
Next, we have Matthew from WVVA.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey, how are you, Senator?
Good.
Question for you. There's been some rumors and reporting that the Republicans are going to sort of have some difficulties with each other regarding the SAVE Act. What's your approach in that situation, sir?
Well, there are two camps. I mean, within the Republican Senate majority on the SAVE Act. Generally, the members support the SAVE Act. Not all, but most of them do. Some are willing to dramatically change the rules of the Senate, including ending the longstanding filibuster tradition to pass the SAVE Act, the majority or not. So that is a dispute on the Republican side. But that's for them to work out. Our goal, and again, I'm likely to be on the floor tomorrow morning from 4 to 6 a.m. That's going to be my time slot, is just to explain to Virginians and Americans why the SAVE Act is not only unnecessary, but it would put unacceptable obstacles in the way of registered and eligible Americans casting a ballot, and we shouldn't do that.
All right, our final questions from Mitchell from WTOP.
Hey, Mitchell.
Hey, Senator, had to join a little bit late, so apologies if you've
Yeah.
already touched on this, but related to the Straits of Hormuz, as somebody who's on the Senate Armed Services Committee, as somebody who's very involved with naval operations, obviously with Virginia, are you surprised at the seemingly lack of preparation related to all the things that are transpiring there, given what was at stake? And also, secondly, related to the floor action, is the War Powers resolution, because it's privileged, can that slide in during this debate over the SAVE Act?
Mitchell, yes. The War Powers resolution is privileged, and a privileged motion can be brought up at any point unless you're in what's called post-cloture time on a bill. So post-cloture means the bill's on the floor, you've had some debate, maybe some amendments, you've had a 60-vote cloture vote to cut off debate and move to final passage. Once you've cut off debate on a bill and you're moving into the final passage vote and debate, you can't bring up a War Powers resolution then. But as long as you're before a cloture vote, you can. And we're not going to get post-cloture on the SAVE Act because there won't be 60 votes to cut off debate. So yes, you will likely see a vote on a Iran War Powers vote sometime during the next few days. It could be today, as early as this afternoon, as late as Monday or Tuesday of next week. But yes, you will see another Iran War Powers vote. And unlike the first one that happened in the first days of the war, now we've seen the cost, U.S. casualties, the energy prices spiking, chaos in the region as Israel is now not only involved in a war against Iran, but increasingly engaging in military action in Lebanon. Iran is firing retaliatory missiles, not just at Israel or U.S. positions, but other nations as well. So senators who wanted to duck this debate and voted against the resolution to begin with are now seeing the consequences of this war widening that may cause some to be more supportive. I am surprised at the lack of planning and preparation for what we're seeing in the Straits of Hormuz, particularly because the president and his team were warned this would happen. The closing off of Straits of Hormuz has happened before the Shah of Iran did it. Others have done it. It's a scenario that, war games assume that scenario and then plan around it. So it's not like this has not been contemplated. But the president did not believe Iran would do it. He was told they could well do this, but he did not believe that. And I guess that just meant that even though all were aware that this was a strong possibility, there was not sufficient preparation done to ensure free flow of petroleum, thus leading to this significant energy crisis that many are saying is the most significant shock to the global energy supply that we've seen in our lifetimes.
Thank you all. Those are everyone's questions. We'll follow up shortly with a video link.
Thanks.